Good evening. My name is Kelly Chapman, and I am the director for the Center for Leadership and Neighborhood Engagement. And Dan Bielenberg is one of the key leaders and hosts with the Center for Leadership and Neighborhood Engagement. And we're just so honored to be hosting this conversation with Janet Hagberg and Joseph Mallard this evening. And again, we're just so excited. The Center for Leadership and Neighborhood Engagement is about building community and especially with the faith community. And we're just, again, so thankful for this opportunity this evening to host Uncommon Threads, quilting as a way to cross boundaries. And so again, we're just so thankful for this evening. Janet Hagberg, who's a dear friend and an amazing person who's written books about spirituality and just journeying. I've known Janet for quite a while in the ways that she just walks with spirit and life and love in the world. And Joseph Mallard. And I hope that you've been blessed to be able to review the video about Joseph and his wonderful journey and just the opportunity. And again, one of the wonderful things is this evening, we're not just speaking from the wonder and the amazing opportunities here in Minneapolis, but all the way to Louisville, Kentucky. And so just if you're in your car, buckle up your seatbelt. And we're just on for a wonderful ride here. And so in our Zoom chat this evening, we begin with a time of welcome, safety, and belonging. And this space and this rich opportunity to celebrate in conversation. And really, the conversation with Janet and Joseph is amazing, but you also share the amazing opportunity in the breakout to enter in the intimacy of a chat, where that space where we have the opportunity to listen more deeply to one another and go into that uncommon experience that we so often miss. So we welcome you. We invite you into a rich conversation, a time of connecting, and then we will send each other out to do the work and be that community in the world. So we want to begin by centering ourselves as we are here in Minnesota, that this is Native American people, and we gather tonight, beginning with just centering ourselves again. And we are, I'm sorry, I'm looking for my papers here. The Center for Leadership and Neighborhood Engagement is located on ancestral homeland of the Dakota people. And we're in close proximity to the territories of the Anishinaabe and Ho-Chunk peoples. This land has been stewarded as a living relative by the Dakotas for generations. The United States government effectively stole this land from the Dakota people through a series of unjust treaties and broken promises, followed by targeted efforts of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forced removal. For this, we repent and commit to doing better. So we look now to the Dakota people and all Native American communities as examples of resilience, resistance, and strength. We're grateful to have the opportunity to learn and to work in this community on this territory. So that as we enter into conversations of justice and racial justice tonight, let us remain mindful of these broken covenants and commit to building trust in all of our relations. We know that God and the people are joining from various locations across Minnesota, the United States, and beyond. In the chat, I invite you to name the land from which you are joining. And there's a link in the chat to help you locate that information. We may or may not have that tonight. And so as we enter into our conversation, we center ourselves. recognizing the brokenness and the healing that is before us. And tonight, as we remember the land and acknowledge the land on which we are, we also open up our hearts to the people of Ukraine and all of the disruption in our world. So we'll take a moment of silence and we will prepare to enter into the celebration of community and coming together.
If you have a moment, Kelly, I think there's someone that's trying to get in. He just texted me. He said he joined, but he's in the chat room, I think.
Joseph, there was a person, I just let them in, so maybe.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
So.
Yeah, so Joseph, I want to throw this over to you and Janet. And the question is, how did you, and Janet, how did you get started quilting?
Okay, I'd be happy to answer that for you, but I want to begin by saying to everybody who joined the meeting, thank you for joining in with us to hear our story. And I hope that by some stretch of the imagination that you will be touched and find ways to reach beyond, find things in common, to be friends with others. I was born in Summit, Mississippi, the southwestern part of the state, about 120 miles north of New Orleans. A very small town. Was born in 1943 during the Jim Crow era. My great-great-grandmother, who was a former slave, lived with us in our home. And as a young boy, I didn't really understand or know how powerful that was. But I do remember being such a skinny kid. Nobody wanted me on their basketball team or their football team. And after school, when the boys would be choosing people to be on their teams, no, we don't want you. And I would drift away and come home, and my grandmother would be on the front porch making quilts. And I would sit and tell her how rejected I felt because nobody wanted me on their teams. And I can remember just as if it happened yesterday, she would pull me close to her and she said, please do not worry about what other people think you cannot do, but I want you to find something that you can do and do it with all of your might. Well, I didn't start quilting right away, but I did join the band, the high school band. And I got exposed to classical music and jazz music and just a variety. The band director was just really into music. And as time grew, my grandmother's eyes were very dim and she could not thread her needles. So she would ask me to thread her needles. And I did so, having no idea that I would grow up and later make quilts. I'm going to fast forward a little bit just for the sake of time. I was working in corporate America in Hartford, Connecticut, Stamford, Connecticut, Springfield, Massachusetts. And it was during the hippie era. And I grew my hair long and a long beard and went to Woodstock, and somehow I got this idea. No, I saw Rosie Greer on the Mike Douglas show doing needlepoint. And it took me back to my childhood when I would see my great-great-grandmother make quilts. And my immediate response was, if a big guy like that can do it, a little skinny guy like me can do it. And I rushed out and I bought needles, thread, fabric, and just started to work. And my sons were very young at the time. And I began by embroidering statements on the back of denim jackets. On the jacket of the oldest boy, I embroidered Superfly, dope kills people, dig that. And I did a similar one for my younger son. And we walked around places and would go places on the airplane, and people were just fascinated with these jackets. Well, as my hippie life evolved, I started embroidering on people's shirts and sleeves and jeans and whatever I could embroider on. And it just grew. So when President Jimmy Carter was elected president of the United States of America, I had the idea that I would embroider a shirt that would chronicle his political life from Plains, Georgia to Washington, D.C. And I don't know how much time we have. That's a long story of how I got the shirt to him. But to sum it up for you, it was a few obstacles involved. I actually went to Washington, D.C. without an appointment, went to my congressman's office, and they made contact, gave the shirt to Jimmy Carter, and the shirt is now in the National Archives. And when I got back to Louisville, Kentucky, the local newspaper did a feature story on the front page. And that was the beginning. And since that time, I've done pieces for Mikhail Baryshnikov, Sammy Davis Jr., Dick Gregory, Mayor Charles Evers of Fayette, Mississippi. Just never dreamed that this would happen. But hopefully that gives you some insight into how I got started. And I'll allow Janet to.
Well, do you want them to see a few of your pieces?
That would be great.
Dan?
Dan, if you could show, it doesn't matter which ones you show, I could talk a little bit about it. This particular piece is one that I did for my youngest son. I started it the day that he was born, and I worked on it 6 days a week for the first 21 years of his life. And it chronicles things that happened around the world during the first 21 years of his life. I also included his education, where he went to school, his first job, his first apartment, just everything that happened in that first 21 years of his life. And he still allows me to keep it in my home, and he says one day he'll get it. So I really enjoyed it. It hangs in my living room. You can show the next one, Dan. This is the one that I did for President Obama. It chronicles the first 4 years of his administration as president. And I mean, this gives you an idea, but it doesn't really give you the moment to look at the detail and all of the things that are in it. But you can see there are a lot of neckties, and I named it the tie quilt. It took 5.5 years to do it. I think we have time for one. We can do one more, Dan. Yeah, you can see the little guy in the center of it on a skateboard. And this particular piece is dedicated to young people. And you can't see it clearly, but at the top on his hat, it says, "Think Big." And he's got a spray can in his hand. And it has messages to the young people. And let me just read one message that you can't see, but I know what it says. It says, "Feel life in me. Be aware of what you cannot see in me. And I wanted to put that there because so often with African American boys, we have a certain image, especially if we see them in groups, and we make assumptions before we are able to talk to them. And I wanted to make a statement that we should stop making assumptions before we talk to individuals and let these young children express themselves. And then it says, renew your mind daily, or it will play tricks on you. We can get caught up in our past beliefs and our comfort zones, and we can make assumptions about other people that we have no idea what their life is all about. I take these quilts into classrooms and use them as teaching tools as I work with young people. So, and maybe in the chat, we can talk a little bit more about the detail, but I just don't want to take up all of the time I want to share with my friend Janet.
Okay, Dan, do you want to put up the picture of the turquoise quilt? You have to fast forward. Yeah, that one, yeah. So the way that I got started quilting is I inherited this quilt from my grandmother and 2 other quilts as well. And only the top of it was done. It hadn't been, the batting and the backing hadn't been put on. And I really wanted to complete it in the manner in which it had been made. So I was in a walking group at the time, and one of the women in the group, Gail, is a master quilter. I hope she's here tonight. I don't know if she is, but thank you. So I asked her if she would help me learn how to finish this quilt. And it took me 2 years to do it, but we got fabric for the backing. And then in the turquoise part, she helped me with a pattern. So I quilted all the turquoise pieces 3 times around. So that was my contribution to this quilt. And then as she was teaching me, we went to the coffee shop, our whole group, after we walked every morning, and I would ask her these questions and she'd write the answer down on a napkin. So I have this whole pile of napkins with all my instructions of how to quilt. And then once I finished this, I brought it to a woman that is a quilt historian, because I wanted to learn about the history of the era that this quilt was made. And it was made in about the 1930s. And she said, well, this is really a combination of 2 different patterns. And then she said, the woman that quilted this quilt had a mind of her own. And I got a kick out of that because that'll figure in later to my story. But I liked that I had inherited this quilt from a woman that had a mind of her own. And then if you put on the next slide, Dan. So then my friend Gail invited me to go to a quilt show. And at that quilt show, I saw these amazing quilts that were very detailed, very precise. Some of them were embroidered, some of them were appliqued, and they were large and way beyond my pay grade at the time. And so when we were walking around, I saw a quilt that looked something like this one. And I stopped and I said, Gail, I just got an electric charge through my body. What is that? And she said, well, that's called a 1-block wonder. And that is made up of about 100 hexagons. And I said, well, could I do something like that? And she said, well, it's not as hard as it looks. So my first quilt that I did myself was this quilt, which is a 1-block wonder. And you design the whole quilt yourself. All these little hexagons are just sitting there and you have to design them. So one of my friends was staying with me on the weekend that I was doing this design, and she helped me complete this. We call it the River of Love because of that purple line that kind of goes down through the whole thing. And so when she got home about 6 months later, she developed breast cancer. And I finished this quilt and then I sent it to her so that she could have it when she was in her recovery time. And she didn't really recover. She died about a year later. And then her daughter willingly sent this quilt back to me. So I have this quilt on my lap every morning in my prayer time. And I find that really inviting, really inviting. And then the next slide. So I went to Kelly's church. I've been going there for 21 years, and I was in a quilt group there that was a multiracial quilt group. And I had been making paper icons, and I consider icons a sacred image that is like a window to God. So you look at it or you hear the story of it, and it reminds you of something about God or your faith. And so I've been doing paper icons, and Sharon, thank you, Sharon, a woman in the group said to me, well, why don't you quilt your icons? And I thought, well, what an original idea. I had never thought about that. So this was one of my first quilting experiences from one of my paper icons. And this, of course, is a boat in a storm. And I embroidered the top in the clouds there. And then this boat doesn't have oars and it doesn't have a rudder. And so it's going to be completely at the mercy of the storm. But if you look around the head of the person in the boat, that's an old doily of my grandmother's. And I put that around just to kind of highlight the person on the boat. And then I realized that was God. So that was the Spirit of God holding that boat, and that boat isn't going to move an inch because it's held by God. So that was my first icon. And I just have to tell a short little Kelly story. When I was talking to him once about racial reconciliation and how that might happen at her church and whatever. And then I was also talking to him about this multiracial quilt group I was in. And he said, well, Janet, that quilt group is racial reconciliation. And I said, what? And he explained to me that when you're doing things that you have in common that you love, and you have a group that's multiracial, it just evolves into friendship and conversations. And pretty soon, you know, you've kind of gotten over a lot of the hurdles. So I really appreciated that. That was one of the wonderful ways that I learned how to quilt. Okay, I'm done.
All right. So do we go to the next question at this point?
Yeah, I think Kelly's going to ask us.
Yeah, well, yeah, but we only have about 5 minutes before the first breakout. But the question was, how did you meet?
Great question. I'll go first, Janet.
Okay, we only got 5 minutes, so I don't know.
Okay, now we'll make this one kind of fast, and we can maybe catch up down the road.
Okay.
But at any rate, I knew a woman who lived in Louisville, Kentucky many years ago, and we were very good friends. And she moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota. And somehow she and Janet met. And Janet, you pick it up from there, and then I'll chime in.
Okay, well, she lives in the building that I live in, and a woman on her floor met me and saw my work and introduced my work to Vara. Her name is Vara. And when she looked at it and heard my story, she immediately thought of Joseph, and she knew that our connection would be amazing. So that's how it happened.
And after she introduced us, we started immediately sharing our quilting and talking about the quilting and how we did things differently, and we didn't do the traditional type quilting. But the thing that drew me to Janet was we shared our faith. Both of us believed in Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And we still talked about quilting, and we exchanged pieces with each other. As a matter of fact, you might show that one, Dan. I made a tapestry for Janet, and I didn't finish it.
Maybe let's do that one after the break.
Okay. Yeah. But anyway, I made a tapestry for her, sent it to her, and said, "Why don't you finish this?" And it'd be a collaboration like that we did, and we did it. So we began to have more conversation, fewer conversations about quilting, but about race reconciliation. We had some difficult conversations that you ordinarily would not having ever met each other in person. But the quilting just kept coming up, and I'm forever grateful to my friend Vara who invited us, and she was going to be here tonight, but had a root canal and was unable to be here because of pain. But that's basically how. I don't know how many minutes we have before the breakout.
Well, this might be a good time. And we don't want time to define this beautiful opportunity that we have. So, but this might be a good time to transition into the breakout, because the breakout is where all the participants, you get to do your work as well. And with the breakout, one of the things that I captured from your conversation, Joseph and Janet, is that quilting is a spiritual practice. Has been a thing about Joseph handed down from your grandmother before you even knew what you were invited into.
Absolutely.
And Janet, the number of relationships, including your grandmother. And so thinking about many of the people who are here this evening, also, whether they think of it or not, quilting may be a spiritual practice that they do individually and or in community with others. And so thinking about in the breakout, whether you're a quilter, whatever, what might be your spiritual practice? And how does that deepen your relationship with God, your relationship with yourself, and perhaps your relationship with others? So maybe that could be our breakout, and then we'll come back. And I'd love to hear more about Janet and Joseph, how you met, and then we have more conversation. But welcome back, everyone, as we regather. We'll have a couple minutes, just any sharing that you might have. You can put it in your chat, and maybe we can have one or two people speak briefly. If you raise your hand, and what is some nugget, something that you picked up from your chat conversation.
Yeah, now we got the whole group back.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you can share that again, instructions for folks.
Yeah. So now as we regather, we have an opportunity to take just a couple of comments, questions, statements from your chat, something that you gleaned, an insight. That would be great. I have to say hello to our friend Ruth here. So it's great to have everyone here this evening. So you can raise your hand, and the reactions button down underneath, you can raise your hand, or physically raise your hand if you care to share an insight or something that struck you during the rich chat conversation. Don't all go at once.
I know everybody's shy. I've got some comments in the chat here. What a great role model, says Marty. Great male role model. I agree, Joseph. I wasn't popular in the sports crowd either. Martha says, collaborations are a spiritual practice of letting go of control and opening to the unexpected. Okay, Betsy's got something to share. I invited you to unmute, so you should be able to unmute yourself.
We had a very rich conversation about quilting and getting started, and then we kind of wound around to the representation of moose in Joseph's work. That was just a detail that surprised me, and I wanted to know if maybe there was a story there.
Joseph, are you able to answer that question? Please, fine. I don't see Joseph.
Joseph, there he is. Oh, he's muted. I'm sorry, Joseph. You should be able to unmute yourself here. There you go.
Now, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I was in a 5th grade classroom working with students making quilts. And this one kid said, may I give you a nickname? I had this moose puppet. And she said, J Moose Sticking Needle. And I said, why? She said, your first name is Joe, so we'll use J for your first initial. And you seem to love your moose puppet so much, we'll call your middle name Moose, and you stick your needle when you work. So I want to call you J Moose Sticking Needle. And what a great idea. I named my studio Moose Farm USA. And I started getting moose jokes. And when I go into classrooms, the kids know now, and we trade moose jokes. And just to give an example, where would a moose go to ride a roller coaster? It's an amusement park.
Kelly Schumacher Fuller,
Yeah.
you had your hand raised.
Yeah, we had a question that came up in our little breakout of for Janet, because I feel like I know Janet fairly well, but I don't know the answer to this. So I was curious too. When did you start making icons, and like what propelled you to paper? And then we heard that Sharon invited you to think about quilting, but where did that come from, that practice?
Is Janet back?
Janet's back, but she's muted.
There I go. Am I back now?
Yes.
Okay, so back in the early 90s, I went with a college alumni group to the Soviet Union. It was six weeks before the coup, so it was still the Soviet Union. And we visited a seminary in Zagorsk, which is 30 miles outside of Moscow. And we went inside the church there. And there were no pews or chairs at all. So you stood, and floor to ceiling were these traditional icons, and there was a choir behind a grate, so you couldn't see them, but you could hear them. So it was this Russian chant music, and then you just stood there, and all you had to do was listen and look at all this gorgeous art. So that gets just stuck in my psyche, and then about 15 years later, it started coming out in the form of my own contemporary paper icons, which I have an example that I'll show. So that's how it got started. And then Sharon said, why don't you quilt your icons? So thank you for asking.
So maybe one more brief question. And
If I might add to my chat, I've met two wonderful young ladies, and we had all of us quilt. I didn't expect that. And one of the young ladies talked about this group from Gee's Bend, Alabama. Not only did she know about the quilts, but she had been down to Gee's Bend to meet these African-American women who make these non-traditional quilts. And that was a highlight. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Janet, Joseph, so I don't speak Spanish, and this evening, as I think about quilting, a lot of you speak quilting, and thinking about how you met, I wonder, how has your relationship deepened?
I'll start.
Okay, and then you want to have him show that photo.
Oh yeah. Dan, do you have that photo that I did for Janet?
This
Yeah.
one?
Yep.
That's the one. I did the embroidery part in the front, and if you look closely, you can see JANET. I used purple and golds and oranges. The purple represents the richness of our conversations, and the bright oranges and yellows and golds represent just the brightness of the relationship that we share and how we can talk about so many things. And this was early on in our relationship. And Janet, maybe you can tell about the border that you added.
Well, then he sent it to me and asked me if I would complete it for him. So I had to scramble and try to find batik fabrics, which is what I really like. And then I completed the border and the yellow around the edge, and then the backing. And then he sent me a nice little card with it. And so I put that on the back, and it's hanging in my kitchen. So that was one of the first things we collaborated on. And then Dan, if you'll show the next one, the hands. Okay, so then this was one that I invited him to help me on, and I asked him if he would trace his hand and arm on a sheet. I don't know if it was paper or fabric, I can't remember, but then he sent that back to me, and then I put those together, my hands and his hands, in different black and white fabrics and then put that heart on. And the idea behind this icon is the verse, wouldn't it be nice if neighbors learned how to get along with each other? I think it's from the Psalm somewhere. And then the hands on the right haven't quite gotten to the love piece, but the ones on the left are well on their way. So then I made that into a card, a greeting card. And then I sent him this quilt when we or this icon. It's not a big quilt. It's like 25 inches wide probably. And so I sent it to him and he hung it in his studio. And then there was a chance, there was an auction somewhere at his church or a neighborhood or something. And so he put it up for auction so that it could make its way out into the world.
And the beautiful thing about this is I had apprehensions because we hadn't known each other a very long time. And my first thought was, well, now who will this belong to? Will it belong to Janet or will it belong to me? And it really didn't matter. I got over that real quick. And he ended up giving it to me anyway. And then as she indicated, it was put into an auction to help minority children with education. And the woman that bought it just loved it. And it's out into the world now. And hopefully it will inspire someone.
One of the things I wanted to say that we didn't have time for before the break was that one of the things that we've learned about each other's quilting style is if you think about African-American music, Joseph's work is more like jazz, where there's kind of an overall structure. And then in the middle, he just goes wherever he feels like going with his stitches. And mine is a little bit more like gospel music, where there's a story behind it and there's some energy there, and there's a kind of a principle that I'm working at. So when you combine jazz and gospel, then it's really interesting to see what happens with our work.
Yes, and the question is, I believe you said, how did our friendship grow?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that was the question. So again, these quilts that we were making, we just kept having these conversations about Black people and white people communicating with each other, and we just seem to believe that the demonstrations are very important because they bring an awareness to the issue. But the real way to solve and to come with reconciliation is one-on-one conversations with each other. And having something in common is simply a springboard that will lead to other conversations and allow two individuals to become comfortable sharing with each other. And that's what has made our relationship or our friendship grow. We just talk about so many things. And I think this would be a good place to put it, Janet, when you were kind of concerned about the style of your work. It didn't fit the typical traditional quilts. And I reassured you that it didn't matter as long as you might want to tell that.
Yeah, no, that's where you really have helped me. I think we kind of helped each other find our way, and the way that you helped me was to help me find that where I wasn't really totally in the quilt world, I wasn't totally in the icon world or totally in the art world, but where they intersected, that's where I am. And you really reassured me that that's where I needed to be, that I didn't need to be a traditional iconographer or a traditional quilter. Those were fine, but that wasn't really who I was. So that is where my grandmother's message to me kind of circles around, because I've concluded now that I kind of have a mind of my own when it comes to quilting. And I like it. And I feel like it doesn't matter if it doesn't fit, because it's who I am. So I thought that was a really cool thing that you helped me do. So
yeah,
now you talk about how you quit promoting yourself.
Yeah. I was desperately promoting my work, and I had a website, and I was on Facebook, and in one of our conversations, Janet says, Joseph, have you ever considered not promoting your work and allow God to do it? And my first reaction was, let God do it? I mean, shouldn't I be out promoting it? And we just left it. And I thought about it that night. And I called Janet the next day and said, you know what? I'm going to just give this a try. And the next thing I knew, I got an invitation to come back to Mississippi, and they recognized my work in the Hall of Fame there. I never would have dreamed that would have happened. Then I got an invite from the University of Louisville. And Dan, if you could show this quilt from the University of Louisville, where they had.
Oh, that's not there.
That's it. These were college freshmen, African American and Hispanic, and it's a predominantly white university. So they asked me if I would come and do a diversity quilt where these young men could tell their story through quilting about where they came from and how they are fitting into the college life on a predominantly white campus, and they being minorities. And this is the result of what they did, these neckties that you see. And it happened just before COVID. So there would have been more neckties, but we lost some of the guys, didn't bring their necktie. I think they just really liked what they had done and chose not to put them on the quilt. But the deal is, when I began to allow God to promote my work, things just started to happen that I know I could not have accomplished. And I had created a quilt, and I was so excited I wanted to share it with Janet. So rather than taking a picture, I mailed the quilt to her. And she was excited and took it to the curator for the American Swedish Institute there in Minneapolis. And this guy was blown away, and he put it into a quilt show that was there. And then he and I became friends, and I've shown my work there on several occasions. So our friendship has been one of helping each other, one of listening to each other, one of exploring with each other. And we just continue to grow, and I'm just still excited about it.
Yeah, I love that story. That was kind of a miracle because, and I won't tell that long story, but I got to know the curator at the Russian Museum, and she's been very supportive of my work, and partly because of the influence of that Russian seminary. And then she knew the curator at the Swedish Institute, and she showed my work to him, and I was in a quilt exhibit there, and then I showed your work to him as I got to know him. So it's like everybody that's helped me has helped you, and the same with on your side of it. So the way that you helped me was that you had a friend who was an international quilt judge. And if you had told me you were going to do this, I would have said absolutely not. But Joseph gave some of my work to this quilt judge and asked her to take a look at it. And she said that she would recommend that I not enter any competition in the quilt world, but that my work was creative and unique. So once again, the DNA of my grandmother, I think, came through, and I would never enter my work in a competition, but I'm really glad that I got that kind of affirmation from that quilt judge.
It's just amazing how both of us have not only helped each other but encouraged each other in situations outside of quilting. Mm-hmm. I know I have a neighbor who is white, and we've lived next door to each other for years, but we had a falling out. We had conversation, and we have different beliefs in political things, and for about 6 months, we didn't talk to each other. And Janet said, but Joseph, this is a perfect opportunity to reach out to him and let him know that because both of you love God, your relationship with God should supersede any differences that you have here on earth. And I sent him a text message one day after we had that conversation, and he responded, and we've reconciled. We speak to each other, we're kind to each other, and we both agree that he doesn't have to change his outlook, and I don't have to change mine. We have the right to be different, but we also should treat each other as neighbors and respect each other. And that was a great help. I don't think I would have reached out to him had I not had that conversation with Janet. So.
And next time we meet, we'll talk about our racial reconciliation conversation. That's for another time. But if you go back one slide, Dan, I want to show this one. It's the purple one. No, there we go. Yeah, so this is one of my current pieces that I'm doing. I call this Our Lady of series, and I'm just taking ordinary people and making them into saints. So this is Our Lady of Release and Restore. So the releasing is the kite, and then the restoring is the heart that she's holding. And so I've made 4 of these now in this series. So I just wanted to show you my current activity.
Yeah, and if I can have you to Dan show the one that it's a horizontal one, the creation week. Not that one. I'm actually holding this one that I'm thinking of. Right, yeah,
that one right there.
There you go. That's it. Yeah. If you look at this closely, it represents the week of creation. At the first day, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So we see the darkness at the bottom, and then it just burst into light. And the second day, he separated the waters from the ocean and the elements in the sky. And then the third day, the vegetation came about on the earth. And on the fourth day, he created the stars, the sun, and the moon. And on the, 1, 2, 3, 4, on the fifth day, he created the fish of the sea and the birds of the air. And on the sixth day, he made man, and there's Adam and Eve, and at the top you can see the cross and the crown, the dove, and I am, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. And then on the seventh day, he rested with all of his creation. That's all tiny hand-tied knots. Every stitch has a knot tied in it, and it's just my depiction of the week of creation. I thought it was pretty neat. And I even had to have a moose in that. I couldn't let that go without a moose.
It's a J Moose sticking needle?
That's a J Moose sticking needle, absolutely. Absolutely. And I tried to make it as lifelike as I could. I tried to, just with my own imagination, just put this together to really show my interpretation of how God spoke and he spoke and he spoke. And on the last day of the week, he let all of that go and he rested with Adam and Eve and all of his creation. I just thought that was a powerful statement to make.
I think we're complete.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. So just a thank you again. And as we prepare to go back into our second breakout, I want to challenge us. When I knew that Janet and Joseph were going to bless us with this time, I was so excited because I thought about quilters. And so many people and communities, congregations have quilters. But I want to read from the woman that introduced Janet and Joseph to each other. And I wrote what she wrote today because she had an emergency. And she wrote, "It has remained a great joy that I recognized your gifts and talents. Janet, when you showed me your work and shared the stories of each piece, I knew in an instant how important it was to introduce you to Joseph. And equally, Joseph, I had such a strong sense that you and Janet were destined to meet. Joseph, I so appreciate that we have been a part of each other's history for over 40 years. And now I have the opportunity to share your present and future work with Janet." Signed, Vera. I mention this because each of us has the power of relationship. And using the analogy of, we all kind of have our own jazz, our own gospel. But we also have the agency, the opportunity to introduce people to one another. And I think about quilting as a community. And I can't help but think about if all of those places where people quilt, if there was an imagination for transforming the communities in which you preside, if it's a congregation or neighborhood, what would it be like to actually reach out to one another the way that Vera introduced Janet to Joseph, and how Janet and Joseph continue to invite others into this great circle of diversity and relationship. So with this breakout, maybe time, and Janet, Joseph, if you have a question that you want to invite them into the breakout, that would be wonderful as well. But for this, I would suggest a time of imagining how might you in your circle reach out to someone else, introduce someone, bring imagination, the imagination that we bring into quilting or playing jazz, whatever it is. Imagine that as the opportunity to expand the circle and invite other people in to share their gifts as well. Well, welcome back. This is a great time. Again, go to gallery view. It's at the top of your screen, and enter into that way as we regather. And again, an opportunity to share something that an insight or something might inspired you from your breakout or the earlier conversation with Janet and Joseph. And if you want to make a comment, a brief comment, then raise your hand and Dan will identify you, invite you to share.
Karen, you should be able to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, I'll share. I will say that we worked with the Islamic Resource Center and did an intentional event where people found commonalities. And we are starting our 6th year of meeting with a group of Muslim women and stitching half the time. But it was a lot more stitching, knitting, crocheting to begin with. But now it's a lot of just visiting, and we were on Zoom last month. We've been on Zoom quite a bit, but intentionally we also meet at a public place together. The ladies wear their hijabs. And last month, because of the time difference to Pakistan, when it's an immigrant family, we got to go to a wedding in Pakistan and meet all the relatives and the new bride and groom. So I have to say, reaching out and being, our conversations were, the group is intentional, but it started with sharing what we were making, sharing what we were doing, sharing how to do something, which gave us time to develop trust with each other and have much deeper conversations.
Great. Thank you, Karen. And as you make your comments or reflect, Janet and Joseph, we invite you as share any comment as well.
I met 2 ladies in my chat group, and our conversations the 2 conversations that we had tonight, as I expressed to them, have been precious. And we learned, or at least we shared with each other, how important it is to find something in common in others and not be afraid to introduce others to each other, as Vara did for Janet and myself. It's a good thing to do when you recognize that there's a good chance that 2 people might have a great friendship, to at least try it.
And I would like to say that Ruth told a really powerful story about a man who came to her to have her help mend a quilt. And if she'd be willing to tell part of that story, I think it would be a wonderful a wonderful story for the group to hear.
Ruth, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, I own a little house on the north side of Minneapolis, and we had invited people to bring clothing for mending, which that didn't turn out. But a couple days later, I got a message from Glenn, and he wanted help with mending his quilt. And so I invited him to come over, and he brought the quilt over, and I fixed it for him. I couldn't fix the cigarette burns, but the rest of it was doable. And I engaged him in the process of tying the quilt when it was ready to do so, and putting a binding on the quilt. And he told me at that point that he wished that he could learn how to make a quilt. So now this is a man probably in his 50s. He's Native American. He has AIDS. He's gay, and was homeless for many years, was drug dependent for many, many years, and has come out of all of this, sexual abuse as a teenager. This is a person I would never have met had he not taken the risk to ask for help, and had I not taken the risk to offer it. He has learned how to quilt. He has become a wonderful, wonderful quilter. And for him, he talks about learning how to quilt, and talks about making quilts as a life-changing experience for him. Because before he lives alone, and he doesn't work, and his days were very, very long. But he's discovered that he can get his friends and family to give him money to buy fabric, and then he gets to make the quilt, and they get the quilt back. So everybody wins. Everybody wins in this equation, including me. I had the opportunity to give him what he needed to be able to do this. And he's moved away now, so I don't get to see him. He's in Tennessee, but occasionally he sends me pictures of the work that he's doing for his friends and family. And I am blessed every time I see what he has been able to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. But we need to transition, and this has just been wonderful. Janet, Joseph, everyone, thank you for just a rich, rich evening. Ruth, I'm going to borrow your statement that everybody wins. What a great mantra to carry forth with us. And we get to have Joseph and Janet lead us again on April the 8th. So tell your
I think
friends.
it's April 12th.
I'm sorry, thank you, April 12th. Thank you, Janet. So April 12th, invite someone else. Let's keep expanding the circle. And also next week on Thursday, the 17th, we have our Coming Together, which is our monthly third Thursday gathering. And we have with us the gift of Don and Sandra Samuels. And it will be a celebration of the anniversary of healing our city. Last year, for 79 days during the Chauvin trial and beyond, from 8 to 8:30, we gathered the community, and with the leadership and vision of Don and Sandra, and leaders like Bishop Ann Svenningson, Bishop Eaton, Krista Tippett, just a wonderful array of leaders and voice from our community in the time of disruption to gather and center ourselves as beloved community. And so Don and Sandra will be our reflection leaders as we celebrate the witness of healing our city and how we carry that spirit forward. Again, with that spirit that everybody wins. and the circle is large enough for everyone. So thank you again, Joseph and Janet. And we look forward to all of you joining us next Thursday and April the 12th. Thank you. Have a lovely evening. And hopefully, Dan, there might be some jazz or some gospel to lead us into the transition.